So, John, who do we have this week?
This week, Craig, we have Lukes Lobster. These are two guys from Maine that moved to New York and got their business started on Craigslist, actually. Luke put out an ad, found this guy, Ben, and they started their first restaurant with $30,000 in a tiny little hole in the East Village. The windows sweat really bad, and neither of them had experience running restaurants before, but now they are kind of the darling of the restaurant industry. They're in New York, Chicago, Japan at this point, and they're crushing it. I think we both really enjoyed doing this interview. Let's check it out.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, MailChimp, for making Salt of the Earth possible.
We use MailChimp to send our newsletter, and so do 8 million other businesses.
Check out MailChimp.com to learn more.
I'm Ben Conniff.
And I'm Luke Holden, and we're with Lukes Lobster.
How did you guys get started?
Well, Lukes Lobster started October 1st of 2009. Sometime in the middle of the summer of 2009, I was looking for a lobster roll. Found that there was all these great chefs adding their interpretation of what a lobster roll was and jacking the price point up. And ultimately, the business plan was really centered on answering the question, why are all these great chefs really screwing this really simple delicacy product that I was accustomed to growing up with? So put together a business plan, shopped it around with a bunch of my friends, went through a couple different iterations, realized I needed a partner to get off the ground. I was doing investment banking work at the time, and so I found Ben on Craigslist. The ad on Craigslist said something to the extent of opening a high quality Maine lobster shack in hopefully the East Village, have strong ties to the Maine lobster industry, including being a lobsterman and father being a lobsterman and father being in the seafood business. So can get the highest quality product down to New York. But outside of that, I don't have a clue what we're doing. So we need somebody that can work with me on this, will basically forgo a salary, but has the ability to participate in upside with equity. And Ben raised his hand the highest.
Yeah, I mean, I read that Craigslist post, and there was a small salary involved, and from my perspective, I had been freelancing and doing random editorial jobs on the writing side of things, and I wasn't exactly making a lot of money in the first place, but I had gone into it because I thought it was a passion, and what I realized was I just couldn't wait till the end of every day to stop writing and start cooking. So I was looking to get into the food industry, and I was trolling Craigslist for opportunities to do so, and I saw the post, and the thing that stuck out to me was really lobster. I'd spent summer times going to Maine and hanging out on lobster docks, and I had a great passion for it, and I was excited to find when I actually met Luke that he seemed like he was smart and knew what he was doing, because I may have said yes anyway just for the lobster, but thank God it was actually a good business model and a good partner, and obviously it's gone well over the last 5.5, 6 years.
Yeah, it has. What did you think you were going to find on Craigslist that day? Like, did you want to be a food critic or what?
I was thinking more like entry-level kitchen job type things.
So you were going to take an entry-level kitchen job on that day on Craigslist?
Yeah, I would have taken, basically anything that involved the food industry, and just happened to wind up with a partner position.
Yeah. This salary that you got paid, Ben, was that from your savings, Luke? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so essentially my father and I split the initial investment. It was $30,000. So within that budget, there was room for Ben's salary.
And all the other costs of opening a restaurant and hiring the rest of the team.
$30,000.
Yeah. I mean, it takes us the minimum we open a restaurant with now, and that doesn't even take an allocation of really the soft costs that go into the time that we all kick in, but hard costs is north of $125,000. So we really were as naive and motivated and as committed to getting this thing done as you possibly could have been to make that type of budget work.
Yeah. That $30,000, that seems like it's going towards a lot of things. What did that go towards? How did that break down?
Yeah, I mean, the big bill was electric. That was probably like $5,000. So that was a big one. Then there was plumbing, which is
25?
Yeah, 25, 35, and that was a funny dude that that ended up doing that work. Not
Poorly.
licensed, poorly. Like basically he dropped people off he was in a roving like SUV and he just jumped out, pointed fingers and dropped people off and then just drove around the neighborhood. It was bizarre, but he was significantly cheaper than everybody else and that's why he got the job. Then
did you find him on Craigslist?
Yeah, probably.
Found him on a street corner, I think.
You found him.
Or
maybe I found him.
I found
Angie's
guys.
List.
I found guys that quoted at least twice that much, and then like I think he ran into you, and he's like, "Oh, I just came from a job at the Bourgeois Pig. That guy'll give you all the references in the world." And we just, if somebody says that somebody will give him a good reference, we just trust him. We don't actually ask the reference. So that was how we operated back then when we were not sleeping. So we just bought it, and he was gonna give us half the price, so we did it, and the sink ran at the end of the day. We had to do plenty of fixing on it post opening, but it got us through day one.
Yeah, and then there's some paint and some millwork with the tables and some stools. Building permits
cost a couple grand.
Equipment, there was a down payment on it, but we financed most of the equipment at like a 20% interest rate with no prepayment ability. So that was that was like probably like $20,000 worth of equipment, and ended up. I mean, it was the only way to do it, and ended up being fine. But that was a one-time type decision making process with leasing equipment. I mean,
we didn't put an HVAC in. We were using a window unit that was pre-existing when we moved in, which was terrible. It probably took us through the winter time, but it continued to. Actually, we replaced it with a new window unit, but we still had a window unit, which is totally unacceptable. In terms of even in the winter time, just getting the heat from the toasters out, it was kind of a disaster. So the following spring, we put a proper HVAC in, but
the whole place used to sweat like crazy. Literally, the windows would just run with condensation.
Yeah. We're from that area, Craig. Do you remember the first Lukes Lobster? I don't.
We were in college, so it was too expensive for me to go there. But it looked cool.
Yeah, it was too expensive for me to go there too.
So just really quick. So obviously, like you guys didn't have enough money in the beginning. Where did did all the anything you needed to buy, was that all just financed, or were you able to pull in extra cash?
So we used that $30,000 to get the doors open, and like my father owned the seafood company that we were bringing the lobster in from. So there was a deferred receivable there that was extended beyond terms to help cash flow the initial payroll and get your insurance paid for, and et cetera, like all the G&A that goes into running a restaurant. So we didn't have to pay our seafood bill for a little while, and we dragged that payable. But ultimately, like we were drummed up in an incredible amount of business and excitement from day one. We sold more than like 500 sandwiches, and we had a very atypical launch where we were just incredibly successful. I mean, I think we basically broke even within the first 15, 20 days. And from there, we were taking we were taking that equity, that retained earnings, and just plowing it back into the business that for all the things that we didn't do right the first time. And I mean, we're still going back to that one shack and finding areas that, weren't ideal because we either didn't know what we were doing or didn't have the capital, and redoing it. So that was really how we approached that one. And then all growth from that first initial shack has just been from retained earnings. There hasn't been any debt or equity financing so far.
And Ben, what did you do marketing the first one that you think worked really well?
I think that my success marketing the first one was entirely due to Luke, his background and his story, because when I started marketing the restaurant, we'd never made a lobster roll before. We didn't have a product to give to somebody to convince them that this was going to be the best lobster roll that New York had ever seen. I had to sell them on that concept just based on Luke's background, having grown up in a lobstering family, learned to lobster himself, his father being a lobster processor, and his ability to get that premium lobster to New York as quickly and perfectly as possible. And if Luke were just some regular old banking schmuck who happened to like lobster and just thought, oh, I have a good finance mind, I'll just start a lobster company because lobster's delicious. If I tried to sell that, nobody would have showed up on the first day. They came because Luke brought an authenticity of experience to this shop. And that was, when we first met, we were still touring around with other names for the business besides Lukes Lobster. And I thought, you were the thing that is going to sell this concept. Is your story. And so being able to push the authenticity behind what we were doing and the story behind it is what convinced people to come in. And then, of course, by the time they came in, we actually had a lobster roll to give them. So, and it bore out. It actually was the best lobster that New York could get.
Can you add a little bit more detail around like the specifics of what you actually did?
Sorry. Specifics of what I actually did. So where I had come from, I'd worked at an editorial desk at Saveur magazine, for instance, where I would receive pitches from PR people and restaurants every day. And so I'd read a press release that I loved, and I'd read a million press releases that I hated. So I tried to take what I learned from being on the other side of the computer and write a very succinct, unique press release that really brought Luke's story to the fore, and then also talked about, the product itself, about the tradition of Maine lobster shacks, the quality of Maine lobster, the sustainability of Maine lobster, and then why Luke was the messiah for that particular product to bring it to New York. And then I just, I found as many media contacts as I could through my personal Rolodex. And then also, honestly, a few just from putting a sign in the window saying, "Coming soon, Luke's Lobster." We had people from Urban Daddy and Grub Street who just saw that and knocked on the door and started asking me questions. But definitely solidifying in my mind from day one how we wanted to describe what we were doing and why was critical.
Social was a big part of the launch too. I mean, we were pretty early adopters of back then. I mean, Facebook was probably number one, and then Foursquare was actually really big, and Twitter was like just becoming interesting. But those, and certainly Yelp, we were quick to learn feedback from Yelp and respond to it. We took special attention to make sure we got in front of all of those food blogs and invited them in and try our food and encouraged them to write positive reviews. And then we used our social media to share those reviews and stories, and kind of snowballed little pieces into big pieces. And Ben got us into New York Times within like the first 3 weeks, a month of opening.
It was the second week. Second week that we opened.
I still don't know what that review meant. It was like I couldn't tell if it was overwhelmingly positive or neutral or negative.
I mean, the gist of it was, wow, these guys are doing really good lobster at a really accessible price, and nobody ever thought this would happen before. Then, unfortunately, Sheik said that we could be the equivalent of a dirty water dog, and she thought that was a compliment, I think, but it doesn't really sound like one.
Yeah, it was basically I think she was saying like lobster rolls are going to be as excessive as hot dogs.
It was she only said positive things about the experience, but the closing line was just, don't say dirty water and lobster in the same sentence. Come on.
But it's the New York Times, so you guys got an uptick after that, yes?
We got
certainly did.
Big uptick from that one, yeah.
Yeah. In the beginning, you guys were, Foursquare. I haven't heard that in a little while. You guys were early adopters of that. Does that still play a role in your new stores?
Certainly. So social media is still huge for us. Twitter and really Instagram are the two big platforms that I think drive traffic and brand awareness for us. Maybe more brand awareness than traffic, but Instagram's obviously fantastic from the food porn side of it. Our food is very photogenic, so it's fun for us to post photos of the food and story of how the food gets from fishermen to the plate. And likewise, it's fun for our guests to post photos of our food. So that's been, smartphone and Instagram have been very, very good for us. Twitter is very conversational. It's great for getting news out and quick, fun updates and facts about the brand. And Facebook seems like it's still one of our biggest audiences, but it's got less interest with a lot of our guests.
Less traffic, or it doesn't convey your message as well as some of the other platforms?
Well, there's a whole visibility algorithm with Facebook now where if you don't pay to make people see your posts, nobody sees your posts because they're monetizing now. So Twitter and Instagram don't have that yet. There's not the opportunity to pay to promote your posts, and so you have sort of equal footing when what you get out there, everybody's gonna see. As a brand on Facebook, you don't get that, so that's why we're not getting as much traction there. But I was just gonna say, what I've noticed recently is maybe the most useful thing now about social media for us is particularly opening in a new market where not many people might have heard of us yet, and we'll put on Instagram a picture of the newly built out Chicago location and say, hey guys, check out our new Lukes Chicago opening this week. And then you'll see a string of 27 comments, and the comments don't say anything. They're just like copied to that person from New York's friend who lives in Chicago. So that person sees that and knows that their friend is telling them that this is something they should pay attention to.
Yeah. What are the big cost drivers nowadays in your business? What kind of keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our P&L, essentially it's food costs are about 40% of our sales. Labor's another 10 to 15. Rent's another 5.
In-store labor is 10 to 15.
Yeah,
not
store labor.
All your management.
Yeah. Rent is another 5 to 10. And then G&A is another 20, or whatever the difference is to get you to 10-15%. So it ends up being, at the end of the day, it's a skinny business. If you are in this business to get rich, you're in the wrong business. There's a lot of people and a lot of care that has to go into managing food and a very big staff. I mean, we're close to 450 teammates now between the two businesses. So there's a lot of risk in a model like that.
Does the price of lobster fluctuate much?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, now coming into the plant, it's $4.50 a pound, and a short 5 months ago, it was like $11-12 a pound. So there's crazy fluctuations. But ultimately, we look at costs on a 12-month calendar. You can't look at it on a daily or weekly basis. Otherwise, you kind of go batty.
So, what's the plan for the next 5 years of Lukes Lobster?
Yeah, we're not really great looking out 5 years. Never have been. But for the next 2 to 3 years, we feel very comfortable and excited to grow at a pace of 4 to 6 shacks a year. And the strategy will look predominantly like building out markets that we're already in, and then potentially adding, maybe one new shack in a new area each year. Something to that tune for the next 2 to 3 years. So if we have 17 now and we get to 30 in the next 3 years, that would be a home run, I think.
Yeah.
Any kind of lessons that you've learned along the way that you wish you had learned a little bit earlier?
I think something that I've learned recently, because we've finally brought on a COO with significant restaurant experience after 5 years. I wish that I had become better and thought more about teaching management, about teaching people. We have so many folks, some of whom have learned to excel on their own without enough help from me, and some of who've unfortunately moved on to other things because I didn't give them enough support when it came to teaching management skills. Because, I just am sort of making it up as I go along. And so I think when you put somebody in charge of a shop, and you trust them inherently to order their inventory and make sure things are opening and closing smoothly and handle the money, sometimes you don't think about the most difficult part of that position being just their day-to-day interactions with their team, how they motivate their team. And I never thought about that. I just kind of did it on the fly and was lucky enough that my gut tended to lead me in the right direction. But I think I would recommend that anybody looking to grow a business actually try to put a management philosophy into words and actually put in the work to read the greats like Danny Meyer, who have thought so much about managing people, and to talk to others who have managed people, so that you don't find yourself giving insufficient support to your team on that front.
Now, if you guys, if someone approached you and they wanted to start a restaurant, what would you tell them?
We actually, one of the great privileges of where we are right now is that happens to us all the time, and it's one of the most fun things that we get to do. I think when people approach me and ask if they should open a food truck, I say, hell no. But that's a whole nother discussion. People that want to open restaurants, I'm incredibly encouraging to, because I can't imagine a more fulfilling life experience. I think the number one recommendation I give to them is just that there's no such thing as too much time or effort or energy spent on getting the right people to carry your business, because that's exactly what they will do. I think anybody who wants to run a restaurant business like Steve Jobs is, with all due respect to Steve Jobs' great accomplishments, going to fail, because the best restaurants are the ones that appreciate every single person whose efforts and ideas go into making that restaurant as good as it can be.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Salt of the Earth. Next week, we talk to Harriet Mills in a really funny interview about going from being unemployed and unable to pass a real estate exam to the CEO and founder of one of the largest wine and paint franchises in the country.
So we went to South Carolina and went to a paint and sip studio, and literally drunk out of our minds when we did it. And the next morning I woke up and my painting was actually good. And I was like, holy, this is awesome. Like, this was fun. Raleigh needs this.
And finally, so every week we tell you about our newsletter, which we deliver via our sponsor, MailChimp. And every week we tell you about the extra stuff that we include. So this week in our newsletter, we have the original press release that put Lukes Lobster on the map and got them that New York Times food blogger that called them the dirty water dog. And we're sending that to you via the newsletter, which is a nice tie-in to how easy to use MailChimp is. Not only does MailChimp have gorgeous templates and it's easy to use and it's free, but you can do stuff like this. You can upload images or PDFs that your subscribers can use and download. So it's little things like this is the reason why so many businesses use MailChimp. So shout out to MailChimp. Thanks for putting out a good product, and thanks for sponsoring the show.